Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. My name is Vance. In today's tutorial, I'll be teaching you how to make this beautiful cowl dress with slits at the back, and it has a zip. So let's get right into the tutorial. So for this tutorial, I'll be using this 2.5 yards of Duchess fabric to make this dress, and so I'm going ahead to fold my fabric into two. I'll be using the length, which is 60. Duchess comes in the length of 60. So next thing I'm going to do, I'll first cut the back. This was me when I was adding my zip allowance. I used 1.5 inches for my zip allowance. I'm going to mark the zip allowance down to the hem of this fabric. So my client's length of dress was 57, so I'll be using 57 for the length of the gown. I'll go ahead and mark my half length. I'll mark my hip line, my knee, and then after which I'll check it to see if I was in the right track, and then I'll go ahead and mark the full length of the gown. So when I was done, I'll go ahead and impute my shoulder measurements, come down by 1 inch, and then impute my armhole line, which is your bust divided by 6 plus 1.5. So I went ahead to rule out my points to make it more visible. So after I'm done with this, I'll go ahead and take my shoulder measurement. I'll repeat on my chest line and I will rule it out just as shown. When I'm done with this, I'll take my shoulder width. For my shoulder width, I'll be using 3.5. For my shoulder depth, I'll be using 2 inches. So I'll go ahead and connect the point with my free hand just like that, and then I'll mark out my shoulder slope. Then for the armhole, I'll get the midpoint. I'll go divide my bust by 4. I'll mark it out, and then I'll use my French curve to give my armhole curve. After I'm done with this, I'll go ahead and add my 2 inches allowance. For this project, I decided to use 2 inches because my client wanted enough space because she was always adding weight. So after imputing my waist, I'll go ahead and impute my hip measurement plus 2 inches allowance. On my knee, I'll impute my hip measurement plus 1 inch allowance. I'll repeat whatever I had on my knee at this point and on the full length of this gown. So I'll go ahead and use my ruler to connect the points together. So after I was done connecting the points together, the next thing I'm going to do is I'll go ahead and cut out my fabric. So this was it when I was cutting out my fabric. So my scissors was a bit blunt, so I had to change my scissors to a better one. So when I was done cutting out this, I went ahead to open up my zip allowance. When I was done with my zip allowance, the next thing I was going to do was to notch my zip allowance. And then I'll fold it out, and then I'm going to fold out my front block. So initially, I marked out my starting line just the way you see me doing, but then I forgot that this part or this project was actually a cowl dress. I was supposed to leave an allowance of about 5 inches. So I went ahead to mark out my lines, my waist, my hip. That was when I now realized that, oh, I've not actually removed my allowance for my cowl. So this was when I now had to go back to first mark out the length of my gown, which was 57 inches. So this was my new starting line. I don't know if you get. So you could see I left an allowance at the tip of the fabric. I left about 5 inches allowance. So this was me marking out my hip, my knee, and the rest. So I was cross-checking it if it was correct, and then it was correct. What I did next was to take my ruler to rule out the lines so that you won't get confused with the multiple marks on my fabric. So this was when I was making my lines visible. So after this, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and take my shoulder measurement divided by 2. I came down by 1 inch, and then to get my armhole, I divided my bust by 6 plus 1.5 to get my chest line. I'll use my ruler, and then I'm going to make it more visible. So when I'm done, I'll replace my shoulder measurement on my chest line. I'm also going to use my ruler to rule out my armhole. So this was my armhole line. I'll go ahead and take my neck width of 3.5 inches and my neck depth of 2 inches, and then I'll go to my armhole, divide it into 2, and then come in by 1/2 inch, and then get my bust divided by 4, mark it, and connect the 3 points together with my ruler or my French curve. So this was when I was connecting my armhole, and then connected my shoulder slope and my neck width to my neck depth. When I was done with this, I went ahead to impute my allowance. I went to my waist, marked it out, added my 2 inches allowance as I did for the back, went to my hip, added my 2 inches allowance after I divided by 4, went to my knee, added my hip measurement, added 1 inch as my allowance because it's a pencil cowl neck gown, as I said earlier, and I did the same thing for the hem of my dress. So I went ahead to connect the lines together just the way you're seeing me do. So after I'm done connecting it, I actually drafted I used my pattern paper to draft this paper just from the shoulder down to my chest line so that I can be able to get my cowl neck. I don't know if you get. So I had to use that. So this was me trying to get the amount of inches that I would use for my cowl neck. So I decided to use 6.5 as the length of my cowl. Like to get the ruchiness of my cowl, I use 6.5 inches, just the way you see me doing like this. So what I'll do is I'm going to use my chalk, and then I'm going to trace out the parts that I'm going to mark out. But before then, I went ahead to pin down my pattern sheet so it won't be flying about, just to keep it in place. So I went ahead to use my chalk to then trace out where I'm going to cut out. So this was when I was tracing out the neckline, the armhole, and then I'll use my scissors and cut it out. So this was when I was cutting it out. You can watch carefully so you will know where you should cut and where you shouldn't cut. This tutorial is actually an easy one. The only part that was a bit taxing was to get the cowl neck, but then thank God it's actually coming out well. So when I'm done cutting, what I'm going to do is I'll go ahead and use my pins. I'll remove my pins from the fabric and the pattern paper. So this was when I was removing the pins that I used to get my ruche from the pattern paper. So at this point, I decided to spread my fabric to show you how the cowl neck was going to be. So you can see it's already so beautiful. So the next thing I'm going to do is to cut my basic sleeve. I went ahead to roll out my starting line. I always do this. Rolling out my starting line and then taking the length of my sleeve. So I realized that the fabric was not enough for my sleeve, so I had to adjust it. So that part I cancelled it. I'm no longer using the initial mark. I went ahead to roll out my starting line again because the fabric was not enough to get the length of the sleeve I wanted. So I went ahead to take my sleeve lengths. I marked them out just the way you see me doing. So next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to use my ruler to make the lines more visible so you won't get confused at this point. It's actually a simple sleeve. There is no big deal in the sleeve. So I went ahead to take my round sleeve. I folded my fabric into 4, yes. So I took my round sleeve. I added 3 inches allowance for the first round sleeve. For the second one, I added 1.5. I did the same thing for the other one. I added 1.5 as my allowance. Then for the hem of my sleeve, that's the full length of my sleeve, I added my first RSL, and then I added 5 inches extra to give me that bell open sleeve. You can call it an A-line sleeve, yes. So to give me that A-line sleeve at the full length of the sleeve. So this was me connecting my armhole side of the sleeve. I don't know how to explain sleeves though, but this is how I actually cut my sleeves. So this was when I was cutting it out. Maybe in my next tutorial I'm going to give a detailed tutorial on how to actually cut sleeves, but sleeves are actually very easy to cut. So this was when I was cutting the sleeve. When I was done, I'm going to go ahead and notch, and then I'm going to trim out the excesses, the other parts, just the way you see me doing, the unwanted parts, and then I'm going to set it aside. So when I'm done, I'm going to bring out my remaining fabric to cut out the facing for my front. So this was me when I placed my front block on the remaining fabric to cut out the facing. So this was when I was cutting out the facing for my dress. When I was done cutting, I'll go ahead and then cut out the excesses at the down part of my facing. Then I'll check the length. I actually use 13.5 for the length of this facing. You should use 13.5 or 14. Even 15 is fine, but I think from 13.5 to 15 is perfect. So I'll go ahead and sew it at the upper part and then at the side, and then I'll set it aside. I'll also fold my fabric, my remaining fabric for the facing for the back. So this was when I folded it. I'll go ahead and trim out the excess, the part that I do not want. I'll place my back block on the facing, and then I'll cut out the part that I want. So for the length, I used about 3 inches, 3.5, 3 inches. I think is okay. So this was it when I was done cutting the facing for the back. I'll open up the zip allowance. So I'm going to place the facing will be on the right side facing right side. I'll go ahead and sew it down. I'll do the same thing for the upper part. So this was when I was done sewing the front block of my dress. As you can see the cowl neck. Oh wow, this is so good. I love how it drapes down there. So this is the back when I was done sewing the facing, and I've gone ahead to iron it out. So I'm going to place the back facing the back so I can be able to close down my zip allowance. So I'm going to separate the facing from my zip allowance. So this was me separating the facing. I'll only sew the zip allowance. I'm not going to sew down the facing part. I've gone ahead to hem the down part of my sleeve, and I've gone ahead to iron too the both of the sleeves. So this was when I was done sewing the zip part. I've also gone ahead to iron, and I also went ahead to hem the slit at the back. So our dress is already coming out, and it's so neat. As you can see, I did not sew down the facing parts because that's where I'm going to cover my zip. So this was when I was taking my body shape. I've gone ahead to take my bust. I'll repeat it on the other side. If you're very conversant with my tutorial, you realize that this is how I actually shape my dresses. So I'm going to divide my hip by 4. I'm going to mark it out. Then I'll connect it to the waist. I'll do the same thing for the other part. My hip by 4, divide it by 4, connect it to the waist, and from the waist to the bust. And then for my knee, I'm going to impute my hip minus 1 inch. So I'm going to connect it to the hip part. I'll do the same thing for the other side, my hip minus 1 inch. Then I'm going to connect it straight down to the full length of the dress. So whatever I had extra there, that's what I'm going to use to make my connect down to the hem. I'll do the same thing for the other parts too. I'll get what I had in between that point, and then whatever I had there, that's what I'm going to use to trace it down or to mark it down to the hem of my dress. So when I'm done with this, the next thing I'm going to do is I'll introduce my front block, and then I'll place my back block on it so that I'll go and join my shoulder lines together. So this was my back block. When I place it on my front block, I'll go ahead and sew down my shoulder to shoulder measurement for the back and the front. I'll sew it down, and then I'll go ahead and take my side shaping. But before I do that, I'm going to add my ropes. I actually use, first of all, I'm going to notch where I'm going to add my ropes at. I actually used my waistline, that's 16 inches, for the length of my rope. For my loop, I actually used 3 inches for the length. So I used 3 of this rope. So I placed it where my shaping line is. That line that I used to shape it, that's where I placed it. So I went ahead to sew it down. So this was when I was done sewing. As you can see, our dress is very beautiful. So I'll go ahead and add my zip to the back. So this is me when I want to add the zip to the back. So when I'm done, or before then, I'm going to introduce my my sleeves. So I'll go and sew them down, and then I'll show you how it looks like. So this was my sleeve. I'm going to place it just like this. I'll sew it down and show you how it looks like. So this was the part. If you notice from the zip part, I told you I was not going to join together. So I used the facing to cover the zip to give it that neat effect. As you can see at that point, is very neat, like really neat. Our dress is actually beautiful. Thank you guys for watching. Do subscribe to my channel if you're new. Like, share, and leave a comment in the comment section. I will see you in my next tutorial.